Hi, and welcome to Faith and Spirituality, Supporting Life Journeys. And we're giving you an outline for how to do that. Hi, my name is Shelly Christensen of Inclusion Innovations, and we are going to be talking about strategies to promote meaningful inclusion of people with disabilities in their faith and spiritual communities. We'll be looking at the regulations that guide the planning and implementation of person-centered plans to ensure that people can participate and belong. And I'm going to turn this over to my colleague and friend, Debby Fisher, and she'll introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here with you. I am Debby Fisher. I am with Deborah Fisher Consulting. I have a consultancy that works with families and providers and executives promoting the needs of boards, programs, and general staff development. So today we thought we would start by giving you a couple of examples of the opportunities and challenges that we have been witness to. And so we thought we'd share a couple of stories. The first story is about a young man who loved to sing in his church choir. Just loved it. I was told when I first joined this organization that he loved it so much, he went every Wednesday evening to choir practice, and one of his direct support professionals took him. And as I explored his experience further and asked whether or not his family and or housemates or friends went to church services with him on Sunday to see him as part of the choir, there was a pause. And I learned that, in fact, no, though he loved to sing in the choir, he only went to rehearsals because the staff who took him to church did not work on Sundays. The second story I want to tell you is a story that our friend Lynn Siegel tells about a woman who her organization brought out of a long-term institution. She looked, according to Lynn, like someone who was a concentration camp survivor. She was so thin and emaciated looking. As her direct support professional started to work with her and explore what it was going to take for her to be able to create a life for her in the community, she decided to explore this woman's family background. Apparently, there was no family living, but they found someone at the local Jewish community center. Turned out the family was Jewish, who remembered this woman and her family. Turned out that this woman's family was rather observant, kept kosher, and she had, in fact, attempted to maintain her kosher dietary rules during the entirety of her time in the institution. And therefore, the reason for her emaciated appearance was that she wasn't actually eating. And so as the staff began to learn about the dietary rules for keeping kosher and learned how to cook and prepare meals that would be in conformity to a kosher kitchen, this woman started to gain weight, to thrive, and to look like herself again.
It's so simple when you think about it. When I first started working in the field almost 20 years ago, I met a woman who wanted desperately to belong to the Jewish community and just hadn't been successful till that point. And when I asked her what was important to her, what she wanted, she said this. She said, all I've ever wanted was to belong. And that forms the foundation now for how faith communities can come together and walk alongside a person living with a disability. Belonging is the key for all of us. And as we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, human beings are created in God's holy image. It doesn't say only some people are created in God's image. It says every person is created in God's image. So belonging to a faith community that one chooses, it lets people feel heard, first of all, it valued and respected and certainly supported. And that's where our presentation is going to lead us today, is how to make that happen and why that's so important. So before we do that, let's just take a moment. I want you to really think about this. This is an important question. What gives you a sense of belonging in your faith community, in your religious life, or your spiritual life? What is it? Now, let me ask you this. Who rightfully determines for you what belonging looks like? Who is that person or that entity? It's you, right? And then who rightfully determines your life journey? Ultimately, it's you. But for people living with a disability, that has not always been the story.
So let's provide a context for thinking about the ways that we can put together our goal of ensuring that people who are supported with the public long-term care dollars are able to and are going to have access to religious, spiritual, and faith lives of their choosing. The disability rights movement was actually an outgrowth of the civil rights movement, which in 1990 resulted in the signing of the Americans with Disability Act. Central to the Americans with Disability Act is the promotion of access to the community in the ways that all of us have access to the community. In other words, the responsibility of a community and of our public commitment is to ensure that those people with disabilities have the same rights and access to their community as those without disabilities.
Let's take this a little bit further. What are those places? Where are people desiring to belong? In what parts of their lives? What part of life domains do people want participation and belonging? Well, look at this list. It's where they work, where they live and who they live with, who they love and have relationships with and friendships, where they play, where they have fun, where they go out for dinner, where they get together and go to a movie or see friends. Learn where they learn, certainly. And the one aspect that until now has been sort of at the caboose of this list, spirituality and religious expression.
And so our commitment through the Americans with Disability Act really led to a reckoning with how our long-term funding could support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And of course, historically, this took place in institutions. Over the years, the funding basically focused on ensuring that people were satisfied with the conditions. They lived in congregate settings removed from their communities. But as a result of the Americans with Disabilities Act and legislation that followed, a Supreme Court decision that followed in 1999, there was recognition and an acknowledgement that to be in compliance and to promote the individual rights of people with disabilities, we needed to get them back into the community. And so the evolving focus of long-term funding was the home and community-based settings rules, which in 2014 were revised. And of greatest significance was that it established an outcome-oriented definition of the services, so that instead of just looking at where the setting was and its geography, it really focused and said on the person's journey, life journey, as determined by them. It essentially gave people agency over a life of their choosing and of their preference and of their desire.
Well, we're gonna take another moment. And I'd like to ask you to think about something in your life that is so, so important to you. You can't imagine living without it. Maybe it's that once a week dinner that you have where your whole family gets together, or an activity you really enjoy. And maybe it's your work that gives you a sense of purpose and satisfaction, or your home where people you want to live with also live there. Do you attend and participate in a faith community that gives you a sense of belonging? So imagine, just for a moment, that the thing that you consider to be so important that you cannot imagine living without is gone. And it's not only gone, it's taken away by an outside entity or an organization, by someone else. And that brings us back to that question I asked earlier. Who is in control of your life? That's really important as we think about individuals living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So people listening to you, being heard about what's important in your life and how you want that, and sometimes asking for support is essential when you share that with another organization. But it's not the organization or other people who are in control of your decisions and how you want that to happen. It's you. And so if you happen to have an intellectual or developmental disability, how can we as a society move forward to support them?
And so this is the opportunity of the new settings rule. Everything hinges on individual planning. And what these new rules that have been established by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare have said is the person with a disability who's getting long-term funding from the government must have a plan that reflects their cultural background. They must have the right to make choices about the services and supports they receive and from whom. They must make sure that those services reflect what's important to them, to ensure that the delivery of those services, or what I prefer to call supports, are done in a manner that reflects their personal preferences, of course, ensuring their health and their welfare. In order to do that, there must be an identification of the strengths, preferences, needs, what type of clinical and support might be required to achieve the desired outcomes that person has. In addition to many other things, the person needs to establish their own goals and preferences as it pertains to the relationships they seek, to their participation in the community. And equally important, and perhaps most important at this moment, it's really necessary for us to stop for a moment and understand that when we start to talk about the role of religion and faith, that we understand how these funds can be used. Public funds may not be used to impose any type of religious observance or belief on the recipients of those funds, but they may be used to provide person-centered or driven supports that reflect that person's interests, needs, preferences for accessing and supporting, participating in meaningful church, religion, faith, spiritual activities of their own choosing. So the distinction to be made is if a person seeks religious participation and they've been asked if that's important and explored, it is not up to the agency or the direct support person to be the source of education about the religious options. The agency and the direct support professional need to be vehicles, liaisons, access points, microphones for that person to find their religious expression, participation, spirituality, or faith of their choosing, the person's choosing.
So we both want you to know it's okay to ask. It's important to ask. It's not just okay. It's a requirement. And asking a person what's important to them, what they want in their lives, in all of those domains that we mentioned, certainly, but especially in this area we're speaking about today. Listen carefully. And when you do that with an open mind, an open ear, people will tell you what they want.
So what is your role as a direct support professional or caregiver, provider organization? Your role is frankly to support a person's personal exploration, self-determined preferences and goals for their lives in the community of their choosing. And to do so, we need to determine what each individual's faith, religious center, spiritual history, experiences, interests, needs are. So we like to ask what I like to call the what, how, who, when questions. What role does or did faith and spirituality play in your life? How have you historically connected to your religion, faith, or spirituality? Who matters in those relationships? And when have you traditionally participated in your religion, faith, or spiritual life? As you get answers to these questions, you work with the individual to develop the plan for ensuring that they access, participate, include, and ultimately belong to that group, to that faith, to that belief system. And it must reflect that person's preferences, needs, and goals. It must include a plan to identify and address the barriers, the challenges, the logistics, so that the plan can be realistic, achievable, and frankly, that it will happen. It needs to be documented in the person's annual plan, which is essentially the contract between the organization supporting a person and the government entity that funds it. And it must be clear and specific about who's responsible for each part of that plan. Who will make this plan happen, which includes the person themselves or family members. And so, as a caregiver or direct support professional, what will you need in order to make it happen? Let's recognize that you may be working in uncharted territory for you. So it may require educating yourself about customs, dress, foods, rituals, time frames. You may need to recognize your personal challenges with implementing the plan, what you will do to address them. It means often working way outside your comfort zone, because you may find yourself in new and different situations. There may be huge cultural differences, language differences. Some religious groups practice in foreign languages. And there will also be some beliefs and practices that you may be confronted with that you may not agree with for yourself personally. And we especially see this when we are addressing end-of-life planning.
Is it you or me?
Go ahead, you can do it.
Okay. It's really hard. We understand if you don't have background or experience in another person's religious traditions. So this is not something you need to do alone. Know when you need help. Know when you're not sure what steps to take. If you need help locating a congregation within that person's faith tradition, there are resources that you can use. You can make a connection to the organization, the religious community, and find out if the individual or the family has a relationship with the clergy or with other people in the congregation. Perhaps somebody in your own provider agency has experience with searching for a faith community, or maybe has experience working with a particular entity. We suggest also great help for this is just contact the local faith-based social service agency. So just examples: Lutheran Social Services, Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Service, and Muslim Social Service Agency. Those are just some examples of how to reach out and who to reach out to, because you're not the first person to do this. You are not the first person, and you won't be the last.
So you want to make that connection. You want to reach out to the religious faith spiritual leaders and community centers. And here's the most critical part. It's not about you doing it. It's about being with the person you're supporting to reach out, to work with communities, leaders, to work with their volunteers. If needed, bring in members of the individual team or their family advocates. You want to be sure that who you are and your relationship to the individual can assist you in finding those kinds of support. You want to be able to educate those faith communities. A lot of it is going to require educating the community itself about the importance of the person you support and their participation in their faith community, and that you want to work together to facilitate that. You may have to educate people about disabilities. It may be about the person and their story, and it may be that you have to educate them about why this matters. You want to raise awareness about the needs of people with disabilities and the many ways that the faith community can support them. And you want to talk about participation, inclusion, belonging. You want to be able to ensure that this is viewed as empowerment. This is not pity. This is not charity. This is about promoting the inclusion of a human being in their faith community to create connections, to create support, to find a place in the community of the congregation, as each one of us do, and as we've thought about earlier in this presentation.
Now, the individual service plan comes right back right now as a guiding document of how to do this. So, for example, if somebody wants to worship and attend religious services, start the conversation with the congregation or the people, the clergy, for example, about seeking out and inviting the individual to participate in services. It's really hard to be that person who comes in without knowing anything about the place, the faith community, about who's going to be there, about even where to sit. But most importantly, the power of the invitation makes that door open broadly. Determine the accommodations or facilitated supports required for full participation. Look at just some common ones are sign language interpretation, access, and a place to sit if somebody uses a mobility device. How is the lighting? And are the worship materials, are they in large print? Can they be seen on an iPad, for example? And those are just basic things to think about. But there's so much more, all predicated on what the individual needs to support them to participate. And the really amazing thing about all of this is that people with disabilities can participate in anything that your organization might offer, that an organization offers. Certainly Bible study and adult education, fellowship, getting together with book clubs, and some congregations have men and women's groups. When you have fundraising programs or annual meetings, make sure people get that invitation to participate. And one, I think the most powerful things that one can encourage if a person is interested, is to take a role on a committee and delve into lay leadership. People with disabilities have just as much interest, perhaps, to be on a committee, to make a difference. So those are things to consider. And then encourage accommodation, encourage more exploration of accommodations and the kinds of supports that are needed.
And as you, as the caregiver, go about this support, understand your role when you're supporting people who face loss of family members, friends, housemates, loss of life that is part of living. It really requires sensitivity to cultural differences, to understand the needs of the person who's supported. If people have do not resuscitate orders, make sure you'll be comfortable following the wishes of the person or their family. If not, you may not be able to work with this person, and you need to be open in discussing this with your managers or with the family or the agency, whoever is employing you. Seek support in grief counseling. Make sure that housemates, friends, families are informed of the wishes and the belief system and the religious practices of this person you're supporting. And if you need to, be sure to find assistance to help them get their support.
I love this story. It's a midrash, or a way of explaining a biblical idea. And this comes from our Jewish tradition. A procession of angels passes before each person, and the heralds go before them, saying, "Make way for the image of God." Everybody needs that point of entry, just because they're human, just because they exist. We've really enjoyed being here with you today, and thank you for joining us in this. You can see our contact information. Feel free, please, to reach out if you have any questions or would like further resources. We're here. And we want to thank Faith Inclusion Network and Community for All for this opportunity to present with you. Debbie, it's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Shelly. Thank you all for participating, and we look forward to being able to answer any questions that you may have. Stay well.